So before I give a showcase on this little PS5 emulator console, I do want to mention something, and that is hitting start select to get into your settings, your BIOS settings. Yes, I know it's mispronounced. You might need to do this for some games, especially with the Super Nintendo. Not all games, but I did notice that there are a few that have a little bit of latency in them. So what you can do is you can go into the latency mode, and then this part right here says use run ahead frames. I put this on 1, the default is auto. And then this one right here, run ahead, use second instance. This also was set to auto, and I ended up putting it on. So the reason that I ended up doing this is because some of these Super Nintendo games that are on this little console here, they did have a pretty noticeable delay when using this controller here. So I did want to say that for those of you that might run into some issues with, like, not even just this console, like there's multiple emulation consoles that this becomes a problem. This is a game stick that I ended up getting. It has PS2 controller. Anyways, they all have different games. They all have different interfaces and all of that kind of stuff. So this is Game Boy Advance. We got Sega Mega Drive, the NES, Game Boy Color, Neo Geo Pocket, Sega Game Gear, the Family Computer Disk System, Sega 32X, Sega Master System, MSX2, Lynx, Atari 7800, Amstrad, MAME, Atari ST, Atomis Wave, Commodore 64, Amiga, FB Alpha, MSX, Odyssey, Vectrix, PC Engine, Super Graphics, NES ROM hacks, Game Boy, Game & Watch, Virtual Boy, Pokemon Mini, Neo Geo Pocket, Sega Dreamcast, Sega Genesis, Sega SG-1000, Sinclair, 4-player games, and then all games. As you can see at the top there, it says there's 41,832 games. Right here. I'll zoom in. I'm recording in 4K so that you guys can see that. So, so PSP, Sega Naomi, Nintendo DS, Nintendo 64, which we are going to try because if the console can run Nintendo 64, it's going to run every other emulator on this thing. Nintendo 64 seems to be even harder to run for these things than the PSP. Okay, so we're going to do the one that I know a lot of people are going to be interested in. I really wish that, so if you hit start and select, this brings up the menu for like save and all of that. So I haven't tried this with the Nintendo 64 yet. But with the Super Nintendo, I did notice that it was automatically saving, which is pretty cool. So we're gonna do the start new. I actually am gonna keep the audio on because I have a filter on my mic, so I'll turn it off really quickly so that you guys can hear it. But I am gonna turn it back on. Sounds good. So as you guys can see right now, I am gonna turn this filter back on just because this is a Nintendo game. Definitely no filters on with the game right now, and I can't hear it. All right, I'm gonna keep it at 10 so that I can hear it. Okay. Yeah, there's definitely no filters going on in this game. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and close the content. And I'm going to go into the settings for this emulator and see what we can adjust here. The game's running fine. Don't get me wrong. The game is running perfectly fine. But I want to go to my BIOS settings, advanced system options. So we got libretro, parallel 60. So that's the emulator that it's using. So we got, I'm going to turn this on. HQ2XL. Yeah, this looks way better. So one of the downsides to like these older consoles is that if you have like a newer modern TV, the like scaling with them doesn't because they're designed to match the actual like whatever the older computer, or not the computer, the older. Yeah, that's so, I don't understand. That's so weird that the Super Nintendo, some of the games with the Super Nintendo were a little bit like delayed. But yeah, overall, man, I recommend this thing. It's an awesome little console. If it's running Nintendo 64 emulators, then I don't need to test anything else. And I know that we did a lot of back and forth with the emulator settings. I'm probably going to cut most of that out just because I'm sure you guys don't want to. This video is literally 25 minutes. I forgot to mention how I feel about the controller. The buttons feel great. The triggers feel much better than the PS2. These ones are a little bit loose. The triggers are a little loose. These ones are like much like tighter. Buttons feel good. The joysticks feel good. If I compare it to an Xbox, I personally like the tighter joysticks, but I mean that comes down to personal preference. They don't feel as loose as the Xbox controller. This one also is a little bit tighter, but overall, man, I think it. I'm not going to say it's the same as a PS5 because of course it's not the same as a PS5, but it does feel good. It doesn't feel bad. It doesn't feel, to me, I would even use this like to play games on my computer. I would literally use this to play games on my computer. It does not come with batteries. You are going to need your own batteries. I use the EBL 1100. They're rechargeable. You get like a rechargeable battery, which are they come in handy a lot. My only recommendation to this company is maybe to, if it's even possible, your boy's got a pimple, if it's even possible to get into the actual emulator settings from a game, that would be really nice. It would be super useful to just like be able to like look at it so that you can be like, oh, okay, this filter does this, rather than going to a filter, loading the game back up. I don't like that. Back out, select a new filter, back out, and all of that kind of stuff. But overall, man, I recommend this thing. It's really cool looking. I mean, now I did get the 128 gigabyte version, so you are going to need to keep that in mind. So this is the box. And make sure I don't get too close here. So that's the controller. This is what the actual item has. This is this part. So the PAL and the NTSC and the Japanese, like there might be like 4 Castlevanias, let's say, but the NTSC, the PAL, the Japanese one, the titles are different. So like if you ever like search online and you go to like YouTube and you go to same name different game, you can find these like same name different game titles they're just different, even on the same console. Like we don't have to talk about like Aladdin, for an example, on the Super Nintendo and then Aladdin on the Sega Genesis, which are 2 totally different games. Or if we talk about Batman on the Super Nintendo versus Batman on the Sega, they're literally the exact same game, but they play differently. Literally different worlds, different animations, different graphics, different everything. Lion King is another one that's coming. Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis are the consoles that I grew up with. So overall, man, I recommend this.